So back in 2015, Wall Street essentially woke up to, well, this massive multi-billion-dollar secret that had just been hiding in plain sight.
Oh, completely. Just totally buried.
Right. And the financial world suddenly realized that the most profitable enterprise software company on the planet wasn't, Microsoft. It wasn't Oracle.
Or IBM.
Exactly. It was a bookstore. And that massive empire wasn't the result of some, meticulously crafted, decade-long business plan.
No.
It was actually the accidental byproduct of a spectacularly broken internal engineering system. So today's deep dive is all about how Amazon's desperate attempt to fix its own chaotic infrastructure inadvertently created AWS.
Amazon Web Services.
Right, and in the process, just completely rewired the architecture of the modern internet.
Yeah, and we are pulling insights today from a really rich stack of sources. We've got Brad Stone's definitive book, The Everything Store, plus Jeff Bezos' incredibly candid shareholder letters from the early 2000s.
Those are wild to read now, by the way.
They really are. And we're also looking at firsthand engineering accounts from the actual developers who were in the trenches during this whole transition.
Yeah.
Because this is fundamentally a story about how, extreme human frustration and this totally ruthless organizational mandate forced a massive paradigm shift in computer science.
Okay, let's unpack this, because I think we need to establish the baseline for the listener of just how bad things were at Amazon around, say, the year 2000.
Oh, it's messy.
Yeah, the dot-com bubble had just burst. Amazon survived it, sure, but they were frantically trying to shed their identity as just an online bookseller. They really wanted to become the everything store.
Right, ingesting massive new inventory categories like toys, electronics, kitchenware, all of that.
Exactly, but their software architecture was essentially just this giant tangled ball of yarn. I mean, every time a development team wanted to launch a single new feature, they were looking at a 6-month delay.
Yeah, which is a lifetime in the tech industry. The term for that tangled ball of yarn in software engineering is a monolithic architecture.
Yeah.
And at the time, Amazon's core application was this massive monolith called Obidos.
Obidos, right.
Yeah. Every single piece of code, the checkout system, the recommendation engine, the inventory database, it was all just mashed together into one gigantic interconnected application.
Wow, so everything is just touching everything else.
Exactly. So if you were an engineer working on, say, a new recommendation algorithm for the books department, your code lived directly alongside the code that processed credit cards.
Oh, man. So a bug in the book recommendations.
Could theoretically crash the entire global checkout system.
That is terrifying.
It was. The blast radius for any error was just catastrophic.
Which totally explains the paralysis, right? If the risk of breaking the site is that high, every single code change requires endless meetings, massive coordination, and just this terrifying deployment process.
Yeah, nobody wants to be the person who takes down Amazon.
Exactly. But reading through the developer accounts, the bottleneck wasn't just the code itself, it was the physical infrastructure, too.
Oh, the hardware side was a nightmare.
Right. If a team needed to test a new feature, they had to literally provision physical servers. They had to rack and stack hardware, install the operating systems, write their own custom database schemas from scratch.
They were basically reinventing the wheel every single time.
Yes. It's like wanting to bake a new type of cake, but first having to build a brand new oven and forge your own mixing bowls out of raw iron.
That is a perfect way to put it.
Right. So what does this all mean for a company trying to move at, internet speed?
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture, that lack of scalability was literally an existential threat to them.
Wow, really? Existential?
Oh, yeah. Amazon was burning through capital in this post-bubble market that was suddenly, highly skeptical of tech valuations.
Right, the free money was gone.
Exactly. If they couldn't scale their software development quickly, they couldn't scale their business model. Competitors would just outmaneuver them.
Yeah.
The whole everything store vision was buckling under the weight of its own unreusable, bespoke code. Every team operated as an isolated silo, building custom infrastructure for every single project.
Just a completely unsustainable trajectory.
Totally. It practically demanded a radical intervention from leadership.
And that intervention actually arrives in 2002. And this is where the narrative sharply pivots. Because Jeff Bezos, he doesn't just ask for a gentle refactoring of the code base.
No, gentle is not really the word here.
Right. He drops this iron-fisted, company-wide memo that is now legendary in Silicon Valley. It's known as the API Mandate.
Yes.
And he basically demands a complete shift to a service-oriented architecture, or SOA. But he didn't use gentle corporate speak. I mean, he laid out strict, unbending laws.
Yeah, the mandate was remarkably specific. First, all teams were required to expose their data and functionality strictly through network interfaces, which are APIs. Second, there was absolutely no more direct database access allowed. Like, you could no longer take a shortcut and query another team's database directly just to get the info you needed.
You couldn't just peek into someone else's file.
Exactly. And third, there were to be no backdoors or hidden integrations.
Right.
Teams had to communicate with each other's technologies solely through these formal, documented interfaces, basically treating every internal department as if they were a completely external, third-party developer.
The analogy that comes to mind here is the shipping container revolution.
Oh, that's interesting. How so?
Well, before standardized shipping containers, loading a cargo ship was an absolute nightmare. You had barrels, crates, sacks, everyone loading things differently, and it took weeks to pack a single vessel.
Right, totally inefficient.
Bezos essentially mandated the digital equivalent of the standardized shipping container. He didn't care what code a team wrote inside their own container, but the way it connected to the rest of the company had to be universally standardized.
That's spot on.
But the kicker of this memo was the enforcement mechanism. It ended with an explicit ultimatum: anyone who doesn't comply with this mandate will be fired.
Yeah, it was a brutal shock to the system.
I mean, here's where it gets really interesting, because reading this as an outsider, a mandate like that seems like a recipe for a massive short-term operational disaster.
It was incredibly painful.
Right. I mean, if I'm an engineer working there, I'd probably hate this. You have a company already struggling to launch features, and the CEO suddenly forces every engineer to stop building retail products and start building complex API layers.
Yeah.
Why use a sledgehammer approach like that to solve a software problem? Didn't it just completely halt their momentum? Like, did it break the retail site?
It definitely caused immense friction. I mean, it slowed feature development down to a crawl in the short term. Engineers were intensely frustrated because they had to rebuild their foundations while still trying to hit these really aggressive business targets.
Right, you still have to sell books.
Exactly. But it was the painful, non-negotiable medicine required to extract Amazon from its monolithic trap. By forcing strict API boundaries, Bezos was breaking the monolith down into highly modular, decoupled compute primitives.
Okay, decoupled compute primitives.
Yeah, and the beauty of decoupled primitives is that once a team builds a scalable database service and wraps it in an API, no other team in the company ever has to build a database from scratch again.
They just call the API.
Exactly. They just call the API.
Wow. And building those robust internal APIs didn't just solve their friction, it accidentally laid the foundation for a global product.
Yes.
By forcing this extreme modularity, Amazon inadvertently built a highly scalable, universally accessible infrastructure. They solved the hardest foundational problems of distributed computing, like storage, database management, server provisioning.
And made them accessible via basic web requests.
Right. Which brings us to the ultimate epiphany. According to Brad Stone's reporting, the leadership team is looking at these decoupled, standardized internal services, and someone asks the billion-dollar question.
The aha moment.
Exactly. If we can provision compute power and storage to our own engineers over the network, why can't we expose those exact same APIs to the public and rent them to developers outside the company?
Yeah, and this raises an important question. Was it obvious that they should commercialize this?
Well, was it?
The conventional wisdom today suggests it was this brilliant master plan, but the internal accounts show there was fierce debate at the executive level.
I would be shocked if there wasn't. I mean, think about it from the perspective of an Amazon board member in 2003.
Right.
You are fighting tooth and nail for retail dominance against companies like Walmart. You're mastering supply chain logistics, warehouses, cardboard boxes.
Selling physical goods.
Yeah. Suggesting that the company divert critical resources to launch a B2B enterprise software platform. That sounds like a massive, dangerous distraction.
It sounded crazy to a lot of people.
Right. So why did Bezos and the team championing this, led by Andy Jassy, right? Why did they push so hard against that skepticism?
Because Jassy and his team recognize that the agonizing operational muck Amazon had just waded through wasn't unique to them.
Oh, everyone was suffering from it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Every single internet company, from scrappy startups to massive enterprises, was spending like 70% of their engineering time dealing with the exact same infrastructure headaches.
Provisioning servers, scaling storage, all that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Jassy realized that reliable, scalable compute wasn't a retail-specific problem. It was a universal bottleneck.
Wow.
And Amazon had already paid the massive operational tax to build this infrastructure for themselves. Commercializing it simply meant exposing their internal API endpoints to the public internet.
Which brings us to the actual launch in 2006. And I have to say, looking back, the reaction from the broader tech ecosystem was incredibly dismissive.
Oh, they were laughed at.
Totally. So in March 2006, they launched S3, which stands for Simple Storage Service. And then a few months later, they roll out EC2 in beta, the Elastic Compute Cloud. Now, for you listening, it's really important to recognize the technical leap here. S3 wasn't just a giant hard drive in the sky. It was highly scalable object storage accessible via a REST API.
Yeah, you were managing a hierarchical file system anymore.
Right, you were just putting and getting data objects over the web, and S3 handled all the underlying replication and redundancy across servers automatically.
S3 allowed developers to treat storage as an infinite programmable resource rather than a physical constraint.
Wow.
And EC2 brought that exact same philosophy to processing power. Before EC2, scaling compute meant calling Dell or HP, ordering a physical metal server, waiting weeks for delivery.
Firing it into a rack in some cold room somewhere.
Exactly, configuring the hypervisor, all of it. EC2 utilized virtualization technology to allow developers to spin up a server instance via a single API call in a matter of minutes.
It's mind-blowing. But despite the technical elegance of these solutions, the tech press absolutely roasted the concept.
The headlines were brutal.
They are wild to read now. Silicon Valley pundits were just utterly bewildered. The general sentiment was basically, why on earth would a serious enterprise trust their mission-critical applications to a company famous for aggressively discounting Harry Potter books and selling DVDs?
Yeah, the consensus was that Amazon had completely lost its focus.
Right.
That they were wandering into a space dominated by giants like IBM and Oracle, who would inevitably just crush them.
But they were wrong.
So wrong.
Yeah.
The tech press suffered from a severe lack of imagination regarding Amazon's core competency. They only viewed Amazon as a retailer.
Right.
They didn't realize that operating at Amazon's massive scale had already forced them to become one of the most sophisticated distributed computing companies in the world.
Wow.
Yeah.
So while the pundits were mocking the press releases, the actual developers, the engineers in the trenches building the next iteration of the web, they adopted AWS with just breathtaking speed. And those early believers just bypassed the press entirely. The sources highlight several early adopters, but a scrappy little startup called Dropbox is probably the most vivid example of this architectural shift.
Oh, absolutely. Dropbox is the classic AWS success story.
Right. Because if you wanted to start a file hosting company prior to 2006, you had to raise millions of dollars in seed capital just to buy the sheer volume of physical hard drives required to store user data. The barrier to entry was this massive capital expenditure.
And S3 eliminated that capital expenditure entirely.
Completely wiped it out.
Dropbox built their early infrastructure heavily reliant on S3. They didn't have to guess how much storage they would need a year in advance or pay for idle servers.
Yeah.
They utilized API-driven infrastructure, programmatically scaling their storage footprint in real time as users uploaded files. They were paying only for the exact bytes they consumed.
It transformed infrastructure from a fixed capital expense into a variable operational expense. And Dropbox was just the tip of the spear, really. Netflix, Airbnb, Uber, an entire generation of hyper-growth tech giants built their empires on AWS.
They really did.
And here is perhaps the most strategic, almost Machiavellian aspect of this entire narrative. For years, Amazon managed to keep the explosive financial success of AWS a closely guarded secret.
It was brilliant.
They hid the revenue from Wall Street, from the tech press, and most importantly, from their legacy competitors. If you looked at Amazon's quarterly earnings reports for the better part of a decade, the revenue from the world's fastest-growing cloud platform was completely buried under a vague line item labeled Other.
Yeah, it was a masterclass in competitive sandbagging.
Wow.
By deliberately obfuscating the financials, they allowed companies like Oracle, Hewlett-Packard, and IBM to remain complacent.
They just didn't see it coming.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The legacy vendors looked at that tiny other category and assumed Amazon's little cloud experiment was just a low-maintenance side project.
Right.
By the time the legacy enterprise companies realized that public cloud was an existential threat to their on-premise server businesses, Amazon had accumulated an insurmountable 10-year head start.
10 years.
10 years in feature development, ecosystem maturity, and massive economies of scale.
Which builds perfectly to the $6 billion reveal. because in 2015, 9 years after the initial launch, Amazon finally decides to break out AWS as its own distinct reporting segment in their financials.
And the numbers were staggering.
Oh, Wall Street expected a moderate software business. What Amazon revealed was a juggernaut generating $6 billion a year in revenue.
Yeah.
But the top-line revenue wasn't even the most shocking part. It was the margins. AWS was operated at massive 25% profit margins.
And what's fascinating here is the economic contrast within Amazon's own balance sheet.
Oh, tell me about it.
Amazon's traditional retail business operates on notoriously razor-thin margins. The retail side is a brutal volume game, where margins often hover in the low single digits.
Right, they make pennies on the dollar.
Exactly. But enterprise software infrastructure, that scales beautifully. The fixed costs of building a data center are incredibly high, but the marginal cost of renting out an additional virtual server is incredibly low.
Right. So what does this all mean? The realization that hits the market in 2015 is that AWS is essentially a cash printing machine operating inside a low-margin retail company.
Yeah.
Those massive 25% margins completely altered the trajectory of Amazon as a whole. Every time Amazon aggressively lowered retail prices to squeeze competitors,
Or launched capital-intensive hardware projects like the Kindle and Echo.
or poured billions into building out the Prime Logistics network, they could afford to take those retail losses precisely because AWS was subsidizing the entire empire.
The tail was entirely wagging the dog.
Right. The accidental side project became the economic engine of the whole company.
And that profound success fundamentally reshaped the executive leadership of the company, too.
Oh, for sure.
Andy Jassy, the visionary who recognized the commercial potential of the API mandate and led AWS from its inception, he was essentially tapped to succeed Jeff Bezos as the CEO of Amazon.
Right.
And under his leadership, AWS effectively enjoyed a monopoly on public cloud computing for years.
Yeah.
But if we shift to the modern landscape, that era of unquestioned dominance is facing its most severe stress test right now.
Yeah, the landscape has radically shifted because the underlying technology curve has shifted. I mean, for 15 years, AWS dominated by perfecting the infrastructure for Web 2.0 and mobile applications.
Right. Highly distributed, decoupled microservices.
Exactly. But we are now locked in a massive, high-stakes AI war. Microsoft Azure and Google Cloud are aggressively challenging AWS's supremacy, and the architecture required to win this new war is fundamentally different from the architecture AWS pioneered.
It really is. The shift from traditional cloud computing to generative AI infrastructure requires completely different architectural paradigm. Well, AWS built its empire largely on CPU-based infrastructure, which is fantastic for serial processing, routing web traffic, running databases, serving web pages.
Okay, the standard internet stuff.
Right. But training massive large language models requires parallel processing. It requires immense clusters of GPUs, primarily from NVIDIA, connected by tightly coupled ultra-high bandwidth networks like InfiniBand.
Wait, because training an LLM is totally different from a web service, right?
Yeah.
Like, you can't just break a neural network training run into neat little decoupled API calls across random servers.
Exactly. The data has to flow continuously across thousands of GPUs simultaneously. If one single node fails, the whole training run can stall.
Oh, wow.
Google recognized this years ago and built their own custom silicon, the TPU's tensor processing units, specifically optimized for AI workloads.
Right.
And Microsoft aggressively partnered with OpenAI and effectively rebuilt Azure's supercomputing architecture to specifically accommodate massive, tightly coupled AI training runs.
While AWS was kind of resting on its laurels.
Yeah, the industry sentiment is that AWS, resting on its Web 2.0 success, was late to the GPU cluster party. It is a textbook example of the innovator's dilemma.
I see.
AWS optimized their entire global fleet for the exact type of decoupled, service-oriented architecture that Bezos mandated back in 2002.
Right.
Their network topologies and data center designs were perfected for independent web services, not the massive synchronous compute loads required by modern generative AI.
And now they're playing catch-up.
Exactly. They're spending billions now to retrofit and build custom AI chips like Trainium and Inferentia to catch up. But Microsoft's early bet on OpenAI gave Azure a distinct first-mover advantage in this new compute paradigm.
Which brings us to the great unresolved debate about the legacy of AWS that tech historians love to argue over.
Oh, the debate.
Yeah. Looking at this entire timeline from the agonizing monolithic code base to the draconian API mandate to the $6 billion reveal and now the scramble in the AI era, I actually lean heavily toward the happy accident theory.
Really, you think it was just an accident?
I do. AWS was a desperate, panicked fix to a chaotic internal engineering problem. They were just trying to stop their own website from collapsing under its own weight. And it spun out of control into a commercial product in the best way possible. You simply cannot engineer that kind of serendipity in a boardroom.
Well, I see the appeal of the accident narrative, but the engineering reality suggests it was an inevitability.
An inevitability. How do you figure?
While commercializing it as a public cloud product might not have been the day one plan, the technological outcome was the natural, inescapable result of Bezos's 2002 mandate. When you forcibly demand that brilliant engineers break a monolithic system into infinitely scalable, universally accessible compute primitives with strict API contracts, the creation of a powerful platform is basically guaranteed.
I guess that makes sense.
The API mandate was a highly intentional architectural philosophy that fundamentally demanded a cloud-like structure. They built the universal machine. It was inevitable that the market would demand access to it.
Okay, I understand the logic. If you force the creation of perfect, standardized infrastructure, the productization of it is just a matter of time.
Exactly.
But as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to bring this historical arc directly back to you, the listener. Think about the most frustrating bottlenecks in your own work right now.
We all have them.
We do. The deeply embedded inefficiencies, the projects that take 6 months when they mathematically should take 6 days, the massive tangled monoliths in your own organization.
The structural barriers that seem entirely counterproductive to actual growth.
Exactly. The story of AWS reminds us that one of the greatest financial and technological triumphs of the 21st century did not start as a polished, visionary business plan.
Not at all.
It started as an agonizing internal frustration. It began with a system that was fundamentally broken and the painful, forced effort to standardize it. The obstacle quite literally became the architecture for a trillion-dollar industry.
Innovation is rarely born from perfect conditions. It is frequently the byproduct of solving our own most intractable operational failures.
A perfect way to summarize it. And we want to leave you with a lingering question to ponder as you look at the tech landscape today.
Yeah.
If the world's most profitable cloud platform was the accidental byproduct of internal corporate inefficiency and architectural friction in the early 2000s, what massive, world-changing technological revolutions are currently being incubated entirely by mistake behind the closed doors of today's tech giants?